so the kids would still come in a few times a week. We're a good fit for a lot of kids that need something more flexible and non-traditional. But what we found, and what I found when I started working there, is we were serving a disproportionately large percentage of students who were LGBTQ. And so I started to ask why. Why is it that this school is really attracting students that identify themselves as LGBTQ? And what we found was students were coming to us to escape. They were coming to us either for a fresh start, they were coming to us to transition socially, or they were escaping an unsafe environment in their sending school. And I don't say that to criticize any of the schools in our county, although I think it's pretty fair to say, and I think they would say too, that we all have some work to do to grow to support all of our students. I say this because we do have a huge hurdle ahead of us in this county and in this country in order to make sure that all students feel safe and supported. What we were able to do at my school is we were able to create an environment where students could be themselves. We made sure that we asked students what pronouns they preferred. We allowed kids to express themselves, and we made sure that they had mental health supports on campus. So I became even more passionate. Now, at this time, one of my kiddos obviously was starting to question their gender identity. And so with that in the back of my mind, it became even more important for me and meaningful for me to make sure that I was creating a county where schools had the ability and the power to really grow in their ability to serve LGBTQ plus kids. So as I said, these are my babies. And again, you're probably looking at them trying to figure out which one might be gender non-conforming because you can't tell. And really, like I said, at the end of the day, they're my kids, and their sex and their gender does not define them in a way that takes away from who they actually are. I anticipated crying after showing a couple pictures of my kids, so I put this funny slide in here. I'm not sure if you can see it because it looks like part of it's covered. But basically, it's just saying, hey, I can see through you, what's going on. Oh, my son just told me he's transgender, so that makes you a trans parent. I don't necessarily identify as a trans parent, but I thought that might be a little bit of light humor in there. So I'm going to give you a quick guide to terms because I'm going to talk a lot about some specific terms in our presentation today. Sex. Sex is biology. So these are the chromosomes, the genitals, the hormones, etc. Now, I use the term in my house, we use the term tchotchkes to refer to genitals. And I know that that is not something that counselors would recommend. I know it's always recommended to use the preferred medically correct term for genitalia. But this is just a term that we started using in my house. So I have a little picture of tchotchkes here. If you don't know what tchotchkes are, the actual definition of the word tchotchkes is little knickknacks. I think it's a Yiddish term. But the reason why we started using this term in my house is because my kids, because of the gender non-conforming status, probably talk about genitals a little bit more than normal kids. And it just was a cute thing we started doing. So if you would like to take a picture of this page with your phone, feel free to do so. These are just some easy, quick terms that you should be able to reference. So anyway, sex is the biology. It's the term that we use to describe the tchotchkes, right? What the genitals are. Gender. Gender is completely different from sex. So gender is your attitudes, feelings, behaviors, and beliefs. It's the stuff inside your brain. So I've got a little image there of the brain to help you remember that. The term transgender, this is actually an umbrella term, and I think a lot of people don't realize this. It's a term that applies to a large group of individuals whose gender identity, so their behaviors and feelings and beliefs about themselves, do not match the sex that they were assigned at birth. And we tend to think of sex as being male-female, as being binary, but it's important to know and remember that there are a percentage of babies that are born with ambiguous genitalia or other various medical conditions that make it hard to determine what their gender is. They may be intersex, they may be both. Gender is not as binary as we like to think of it, but the majority of people are binary. A term that you also need to know is cisgender. So this is someone who identifies exclusively as their sex that was assigned to them at birth. So I myself am cisgender. Probably the majority of you are also cisgender. Another term you need to know is dead naming. So dead naming is when you intentionally call someone the name or pronoun they do not wish to use. Now, we all make accidents. We all accidentally use the wrong pronoun or the wrong name from time to time, and that's fine. I think owning your mistake and being transparent and vulnerable about the fact that sometimes it's hard to remember, especially if someone has just transitioned. But dead naming is when it's done when it is done intentionally. And this is actually a bullying technique that we see by both students and adults in a gender nonconforming student's life. Gender dysphoria is another term that I'm sure you guys are overly familiar with. So it's that feeling of discomfort or stress when the gender identity does not match with the sex assigned at birth. And when my child was first diagnosed with gender dysphoria, I really had a hard time with this term. It sounds sad, right? This idea of dysphoria. It sounds like it's this depressing fog that is going to envelop my child. And I had a really hard time with that term. And some days I'm better with the term than others. I'll have days where I look at him and I see the dysphoria. I see the dysphoria when he's accidentally called the wrong gender. I see the dysphoria when he's not allowed to take his shirt off in the swimming pool like the other boys that he's playing with. I see his dysphoria when, because of his age, he's not quite ready to use the correct bathroom yet, but when he has to use the unisex or family bathroom at school. I see it. I see the pain and I see the sadness. And so I do feel that it is an appropriate term. But it also is a term that really describes sometimes the family surrounding the child. So a lot of parents that I've talked to, and I do have a small network of parents who have transgender children. I also have a network of transgender adults. And one theme that I have found is that dysphoria can oftentimes translate to the family as well. I know that when I first had the realization that this probably wasn't a phase, that this was probably something that my child was going to have to deal with their entire life, I was sad. I mourned the loss of my daughter. I have a sister. I always wanted two girls. When I was younger, I would dream about having two girls, having two daughters that would grow up and be best friends and do all these things together in the same way that me and my sister did. And so when I thought I was having two daughters, I was thrilled. And when I had that realization that that vision of what their future was going to be different, I myself had that dysphoria. I had that sadness and that depression, and I mourned the loss of who I thought my daughter was. But that's not who she really was. And all of those wonderful things that I hoped that she could have with her sibling, he is going to have with his sibling. He's still going to have that best friend, and gender and biology and those things aren't going to get in the way of him having that wonderful life. I just need to get over the fact that he is not a girl. And that's hard. And so you'll be working with parents that are struggling with this, some more than others. There are some adults in my child's life who are struggling with this more than I am. And that's hard. And that's hard for him. And he's going to experience this throughout his life. And so I'm really just trying to give him the skills and the strategies to be able to handle that dysphoria and be comfortable in who he is. So here's an awkward conversation starter. Here's an awkward question, and you don't need to respond in the chat. But who here has brought up the topic of genitals in a casual conversation with a coworker today? I'm going to guess probably none of you. However, I think it's probably safe to say that you guys have used pronouns in conversations with coworkers. So at some point today in a conversation with someone, you have used he or she. I see someone said, yes, I did. Thank you for sharing. we use he or she, but when we use he or she, or when we say, oh, that woman, we are not actually saying that person with a vagina or that person with a penis. He doesn't mean that person with a penis when we're talking. And if you think I'm wrong, the next time you go to use a pronoun in casual conversation, I recommend doing this in your mind, not saying it out loud. Try actually saying person with a penis instead of he, and you'll see how absurd that is. Language is a very crucial part of understanding what it means to be gender nonconforming. And so the reason why I ask you this is because I want to challenge you to think about, what does he mean? What does she mean? What does that word mean? And I would argue that when we use those words, we are not actually referring to the person's genitals. We are not actually thinking about what that person has underneath their skirt or underneath their pants. We just don't think about it, right? But we do use he or she, and we use it in our society to denote someone's gender, not someone's sex. We're not actually talking about their genitals. We're talking about how they're presenting to us. And we have, in our current culture, in our current society, a really unhealthy obsession with gender overall. And so I want to challenge you to think about, what do you really mean when you say he or she? And if you're not really saying that person with a penis, when you say the word he, then I would challenge you to be more comfortable with using he to describe someone's gender as opposed to their sex. And this is all to get to the point that it is crucial, it is crucial that we use the correct pronouns. So he and she does not necessarily refer to someone's genitals. We don't think about other people's genitals. We don't talk about other people's genitals. It's just not something that is in the forefront of what we do. But we do talk and we do obsess about gender, especially gender identity. If a child's or a person's gender identity is male, then we should be using male pronouns. If a person prefers female pronouns because their gender identity is female, then we should be using female pronouns. Now, I've had students who identify as male but present as their biological sex of female and vice versa. So just because someone's not presenting or hasn't socially transitioned yet doesn't mean you shouldn't use their preferred pronouns. So all this is just a long way to get you to think about the importance of the preferred pronoun. Think about if you yourself have ever been misgendered. It hurts, right? If someone assumes that you're another gender, because our gender identity, unfortunately, for better or worse, is an important part of how we perceive ourselves in our current culture. So what I strongly recommend you do, as a matter of just common everyday practice, is get in the habit of asking people their preferred name and pronoun. We need to normalize this. If we are only asking this question of people who we perceive as being gender nonconforming, it's automatically kind of outing them or calling attention to them. Or even if you're just having a conversation with just that person, it's showing them that you perceive them as being somehow different. And that may or may not be the case. So we need to normalize asking people their preferred pronouns, sharing our preferred pronouns with other people, so that those of us, or those kiddos that use different pronouns from what their biological sex is, feel accepted in society. So I would challenge you guys, as you move forward, to not only think about when you're in a Zoom meeting, changing your name to not only have your name, but also have your preferred pronouns. And even looking at things like the way that you sign your emails. So I know that in my work email, underneath my signature line, I have my preferred pronouns. I'm cisgender. You would think that it's obvious and everyone would know what pronouns to use, but by normalizing that, we've made a safer environment for other people that may be suffering from gender dysphoria. The other thing I want you guys to know is it is absolutely okay to make mistakes. I make mistakes with my own kiddo. I've made mistakes with students. But you need to correct yourself as soon as you realize the mistake, apologize, and let them know that you're committed to trying to get better. One of my absolute favorite students that I had a few years ago identified as female, was born biologically male, but still presented as male most of the time. So she would come to school and to any outside observer presented as a pretty typical male student. Sometimes she would wear lipstick. Sometimes she would wear skirts. But for the most part, she presented as looking male. I knew she identified as female. I knew that her gender identity was really important to her. I knew that it was something that had caused her to experience bullying and pain in the past. And I was 100% committed to using her preferred name and pronouns. But brains are a funny thing. And when you see someone that presents as male, sometimes you mess up. So on occasion, I would use the wrong pronouns with her. She knew I was committed to using the right ones. She knew that this was a safe place. And whenever I did, I would immediately correct myself. Or I would pull her aside and say, hey, I am so sorry. I just realized I used the wrong pronouns when I was talking to you earlier. And having those conversations meant a lot to her. I think you guys will know your clients and your patients and your students and your kids enough to know how deep of a conversation they're ready to have about those types of things. But I think it's okay to give yourself that grace and know that this is hard. It took me about a year after my child socially transitioned to get to the point where I didn't even really think about it. It just was so natural. And now I'm at the point where I forget that he is actually biologically female. It kind of shocks me every once in a while. I'll be like, oh, that's right. You're not actually biologically male. Another thing to keep in mind in terms of words and language is you never want to out a child. And this can be really hard. You are likely going to experience situations where a child might be out to you, but not to their parents. Or a child might be out in one situation, but not in another. You may have a child who uses male pronouns at one house, but uses female pronouns at another house. Now, divorce situations could be particularly challenging for transgender students. You may have a transgender child that feels safe using their preferred pronouns in the home, but they're not quite safe enough to feel comfortable doing that at school, or they may use different pronouns at church. So it's important to know what environments they want those pronouns to be used in. You can even ask them, like, what do you want me to call you here? What do you want me to call you in front of your parents? What do you want me to call you in other situations? And that's okay to have those conversations. If a child is out to you, whether it's about their gender identity or sexuality, you should never disclose that to a parent unless there is some type of immediate life or death reason to. And I am hard pressed to think of a scenario where it is okay to out a child. I think obviously you want to help them with the strategies and the tools to be able to have that conversation with their parents or with adults in their lives or other people, peers perhaps, when they're ready. So give them those strategies, but let them dictate the timeline. Like always letting the child kind of lead in terms of what they want, what they're ready for is best. However, the example of my child wanting to use the male restroom and him and my counselor and everyone feeling that we're probably not quite ready for that yet. You know, you need to navigate those things together. I want to talk to you about the 80% myth. So there's some old kind of dangerous data floating around regarding gender non-conforming children. And this is data that was first shared with me by a mental health professional. And this data has since been debunked. If you want to know more about it, there is this wonderful book that I highly recommend this be in my resource list that I'll be sharing out to you guys via email. Raising a Transgender Child. So in here they talk about the 80% myth, and I actually I would like to read to you a little bit from here because I think they do a really good job describing this. So basically the 80% myth is this. There was an old study done, very limited study, not really done well, that showed that 80% of children that have gender dysphoria or identify in a different way will eventually grow out of it. And subsequent studies have shown that that study was very flawed and it was not actually true. So why would this possibly matter? Well, this matters because if you're telling a parent that there is an 80% chance that their child is going to grow out of this, or this is a phase, that's going to change the way that they think about their child. It may prolong the grieving process, and it could cause more damage than good. So this outdated idea that children don't know what their gender identity is, or children aren't able to articulate, or it might just be a phase, that actually does more harm than good. So I'm going to read you a little quote from this. Over and over again, parents confront the 80% statistic. They're told that most kids grow out of wanting to be the opposite gender, and that theirs might too. This statistic is often mentioned as a way to console parents, but many people don't realize how insulting and hurtful it is. It implies that there is something very wrong with the 20% of kids who don't grow out of being transgender, and it equates gender diversity with immorality or being abnormal. It goes on to describe the ways that this study was flawed. They didn't actually really follow up with all of the people that participated. The children that participated may or may not have had supportive environments. And so what they found is actually the majority of children are firm in their gender identity by age 4. And that if a child is given the ability to explore being gender non-conforming, if they grow up in a supportive, loving environment where the parents love them and accept them for who they are and do not in any way shame them for being gender non-conforming, that the majority of kiddos that have lived in a gender non-conforming lifestyle after the age of 4 for a year or more, the vast majority of them really do continue to be gender non-conforming. Not all of them. I think putting a prognosis on gender dysphoria, or putting a possible prognosis on gender dysphoria early on, can actually cause a lot of harm. And when this statistic was shared with me, it made me question what I should do, if I was doing the right thing by allowing my child to express their gender identity in the way that they chose. So I really want to caution against that myth. And again, if you want to learn more, I will hold a place in my resources for this book so that you can explore it. One of the things that parents have a hard time navigating is the idea of social transitioning. We talk about social transitioning as if it were this like magical, all of a sudden you change who you are thing. And for some people it is. Some kiddos wake up one morning and they decide they want to start the process. Sometimes you're able to coach them through it slower. But the main point here is that the social transition needs to be done with intention. It needs to be done with the help of family members and professionals that really understand what they're doing. But ultimately, it needs to be driven by what the child wants, needs, and is ready for. For my kiddo, he woke up one morning. He knew we were going to get our haircut. He wanted to look at pictures. I tried to show him a bunch of pictures of short girl haircuts. He picked, I think it was the Singer Pink. It was like one of her kind of edgy, shorter girl haircuts. And he ended up looking like a boy, and that really sparked our social transition journey a lot quicker than I had anticipated. One of my adult friendships that I have fostered over the past year has been with a transgender female, and she's given me great insight into what it looks like on the other side of this journey. So what does it look like for a child after they grow up? And what happens when they grow up in a supportive environment or a non-supportive environment? And how can that have an impact on what my child's future might look like? And she shared this quote with me. And I really want to amplify her voice because, as I said, I myself am not transgender, and we really need to be hearing from those voices. So I want to share this quote with you. So she likes to think of trans or transforming or transitioning as the child is trans. So in the Latin, that means not the same as, but in reality, it is the family that is transitioning to the individual's truth. my child had a truth inside of him about his gender identity. And in his mind, he was not the one transitioning necessarily. It was all of us transitioning to understand and honor the reality that was already inside of him. So in some ways, it's more of a growth and it's more of a transformation for the parent and for the family, for the school, for the classmates and the community. They're the ones that need to change their thinking in order to accept this child who has always been themselves on the inside, but maybe not presenting. So it really is the family and friends that are the ones that are transforming and have to transform their thinking and the way that they think of that child. I have a TED Talk that I am going to play for you, and I've got to exit out of share screen really quick so that I can pull this link up. Because like I said, I think it's important to amplify transgender voice. So we are going to hear from a young man. And this is a TED Talk. Okay, can I get a thumbs up if you guys can see, this is Jackson Bird, if you can see his image. Awesome. And then if there are any audio issues, let me know as well.
No audio.
I am getting a no on the audio. So what I'm going to do, because I do think it is really important to amplify voice, is I am going to send this link out. I do have a follow-up survey that I made sure that the link was correct for. So what I will do is, if you are interested in getting all my resources, I'll make sure to highlight this.
Danielle, we're going to try and help you do this.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
So what you can actually do is you can stop sharing your screen for a moment.
Can you
Okay.
hear Ashley?
Yeah.
Okay. And then when you click to share your screen again, before you start it, there will be a little button on the bottom left that says share audio. So click the green share screen button.
Okay.
And then when you select which window you're going to share, there should be a share audio button.
All right. Well, this is awesome. My goodness. Thank you guys so much. Okay, let's try this again.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Jack, and I'm transgender. Let me take a guess at some of the thoughts that might be running through your head right now. Transgender, wait, does that mean that they're actually a man or actually a woman? Wonder if he's had the surgery yet. Oh, now I'm looking at his crotch. Look to the right. That's a safe place to look. Yes, I knew it. No real man has hips like those. My friend's daughter is transgender. I wonder if they know each other. Oh my gosh, he is so brave. I would totally support his right to use the men's bathroom. Wait, but how does he use the bathroom? How does he have sex? Okay, let's stop those hypothetical questions before we get too close for my comfort. I mean, don't get me wrong, I did come here today to share my personal experiences being transgender, but I did not wake up this morning wanting to tell an entire audience about my sex life. I mean, of course, that's the problem with being trans, right? People are pretty much always wondering how we have sex and what kind of equipment we're working with below the belt. Being trans is awkward. And not just because the gender I was assigned at birth mismatches the one I really am. Being trans is awkward because everyone else gets awkward when they're around me. You know, people who support me and all other trans people wholeheartedly are often so scared to say the wrong thing, so embarrassed to not know what they think they should, that they never ask. And part of what was so nerve-wracking about coming out as transgender was knowing that people wouldn't know what I meant. And when someone comes out as gay, people know what that means. But when you come out as trans, you have to face the misconceptions that will color other people's impressions of you even after you've educated them. And you will have to educate them. When I came out, I wrote a 10-page encyclopedic document with a zip file attachment of music and videos that I sent to every single person I came out to. And I kept in my email signature for months afterwards, because you also don't ever stop coming out. I came out to the accountant helping with my taxes and the TSA agents who didn't know which one of them should pat me down, the man or the woman. I mean, I just came out to everyone watching this. When I came out to my dad, to my great relief, he was totally cool with me being trans. But as soon as I started talking about physically transitioning, he freaked. And I quickly realized it was because he, like so many other people, think that physical transition means just one thing: the surgery. Now, listen, if there were one magical surgery that could turn me into a tall, muscular, societally perfect image of a man overnight, I'd sign up in a heartbeat. Unfortunately, it isn't that simple. There are dozens of different gender affirming surgeries, from chest surgeries to bottom surgeries to facial feminization and man sculpting. Many trans people will only ever undergo one procedure in their lifetime, if that. Maybe because they don't personally feel the need, but also because they're expensive and health insurance is only beginning to cover them. Instead, the first step for a trans person seeking physical transition is usually hormone replacement therapy. Hormones are why I have a deeper voice and some sparse whiskers on my neck and a giant pimple on my chin. Basically, they put you through a second puberty. It's a blast. Now, because our transitions are slower and steadier than historic misconceptions can lead people to believe, there can be some confusion about when to call someone by their new name and pronouns. There's no distinct point in physical transition at which a trans person becomes their true gender. As soon as they tell you their new name and pronouns, that's when you start using that name and pronouns. And I know it can be difficult to make the change. You might slip up here and there. I've slipped up myself with other trans people. But I always think to myself, if we can change from calling Puff Daddy to P. Diddy, and if we apologize profusely when we've used the wrong gender pronoun for someone's pet cat, I think we can make the same effort for the real humans in our lives. Now, there is no topic that makes other people more awkward about trans people than public bathrooms. The bathrooms, the latest political flashpoint for LGBT opponents. Here's a fun fact about bathrooms. More US congressmen have been convicted of assaulting someone in a public bathroom than trans people have been. Now, the truth is, we trans people are so much more scared of you than you are of us. It is a huge point of discussion in trans communities about which bathroom to start using and when, so we don't attract attention that could lead to violence against us. I personally started using the men's room when I started getting confused and frightened looks in the women's room, even though I was petrified to start going into the men's room. Often we opt to just not go to the bathroom at all. A 2015 national survey of trans people found that 8% of us had had a urinary tract infection in the past year as a result of avoiding restrooms. These bathroom bills aren't protecting anyone. All they're doing is ensuring that when trans people are assaulted in bathrooms, the law will no longer be on our side when we report it. Being trans means a daily onslaught of these misconceptions. And I have it pretty easy. I am a white, able-bodied guy sitting nearly at the peak of Privilege Mountain. For non-binary people, for trans women, for trans people of color, it is so much harder. So I've given you a starter pack of trans knowledge that I hope will lead to more learning on your own. Talk to trans people. Listen to us. Amplify our voices. Take the heat off of us and educate those around you so we don't have to every time. Maybe someday when I say, "Hi, I'm Jack and I'm transgender," the only response I'll get is, "Hi, nice to meet you." Thank you.
I will include a link to that video too. Hopefully that was a bit inspirational for you. I think he's very well spoken. And as I said, it means more coming from someone who's actually living it. I am certainly not an expert and I'm speaking from a limited knowledge base, but I do feel that my story may resonate with some people, may have some power, and if I can help one family navigate what can be a really heartbreaking, but also a really wonderful, beautiful experience, then I think I have done my part. So in the chat, I put the link to the initial survey, the welcome survey, as well as the one if you just want to give your contact information, you don't want to answer any of those questions, to make sure that I get your email so that I can share your resources. At the end, I know we've got about 10 minutes left. I'm also going to share a follow-up survey. I know it's like a ton of links and none of them worked, but I'm going to get you guys that follow-up survey so I can get some feedback. Okay, so let's continue. I'm going to share my screen again, but I'm going to share just the presentation if I can find it. Bear with me. Things are so much easier in our pre-Zoom world. Bear with me 1 second.
Hey, just checking in, Danielle. Did you need some help?
No, I'm just trying to figure out how to share my screen again. Do I have to change the settings or will it just allow me to?
Just click the green button, share
Okay.
screen.
Looks like we're back in business. Okay. So why does this matter? Why is this important? This is an infographic. There's certainly a million infographics out there. I will give you some links to some other ones. This is based on a 2012 study. There are actually more recent studies that don't have as pretty of infographics, but I found this one particularly important. This may be one that you keep kind of in the back of your mind, but it also may be one that you share with parents that might be struggling with their own acceptance of a child who is gender nonconforming. So if you look at this infographic, transgender youth with supportive parents versus transgender youth with unsupportive parents have a completely different outcome. All of the data shows that LGBTQ plus students, even more so for gender nonconforming students, but those students tend to have worse outcomes. And as an educator, that's something that is super, super important to me. It's also super important to me as a parent. So we know that the dropout rate for transgender and LGBTQ plus youth is actually substantially higher than with cisgender or peers that are not LGBTQ. We also know that suicide rates, suicide attempts are substantially higher. It's hard to think about this in terms of something so banal as like maybe even hair color. But if you knew that like there was a high correlation between having red hair and having a high suicide rate, wouldn't you do everything in your power to support all the kids with red hair? If you knew that there was a correlation between something like height and suicide rate, wouldn't you focus your energy on students that were really tall and trying to negate those things? So we know that there is a strong correlation between students that are LGBTQ and these undesirable outcomes like dropout rate, drug addiction, suicide, depression. But what they found is that when you have supportive parents, you can negate a lot of those negative outcomes. So if a transgender youth or gender nonconforming youth has a supportive parent, they are much more likely to have higher self-esteem, to be happier. They're much less likely to suffer from depression or attempt suicide. Some of the statistics out there, and they vary based on studies, but some of the statistics out there for suicide attempts for transgender youth under the age of 20 are mind-blowingly horrific. And these are the things that keep me up at night as an educator and a parent, because we first and foremost want to protect our kids. We don't want anyone to feel so horrible about who they are and who they were born as that they are contemplating something as horrific as taking their own life. So this is why this is crucially important. You might say, oh, he, she, it's just words. You might say, you know, it doesn't really matter, just use the gender neutral bathroom. But what we are seeing, what the data is showing us, is that it does matter, and that when children are allowed to be themselves, when children are allowed to be loved for who they are, when they are not forced into a binary, antiquated system of gender conformity, they tend to have much better outcomes. So I really challenge you guys to focus on what's best for kids. You are certainly allowed to have your own political and religious beliefs, but you went into this profession because you care about people and you care about kids, and you cannot continue to work in a profession where you have taken this oath to protect children and not actively look for ways to negate things like higher suicide risk. We have to keep kids safe. We have to actively fight against microaggressions. So microaggressions, the term is very problematic because there's nothing micro about them. They may seem like really small things, but they can have huge damaging effects, especially when we look at students that are LGBTQ and how that might intersect with students of color. So if you have a child of color who is also LGBTQ, the microaggressions that they may experience at any given day are going to pile up. An example of a microaggression might be something like ladies first, which might be said with the intention of just being a very nice, like, oh, we're gonna send all the ladies to go first. But if one of the girls in her classroom that gets to go first doesn't really identify as female, but has to decide, are they going to go to the front of the line and adhere to the gender that everyone thinks they are, or are they going to stay to the back of the line, which might feel more true to themselves? That's putting them in a really unnecessarily stressful situation. In fact, I challenge all my educators, and I'll challenge you guys as well, to just remove gender from the mix. Gender should not dictate what groups we're putting kids into for reading. It should not dictate, who gets to be on what team in low stakes sporting events in a gym class in first grade. And it shouldn't be, gender should not have any bearing on the way that we do business. We just need to remove it as being at the forefront of all that we do. And I know that's hard. I mean, we have gender reveal parties, and it's something that we talk about all the time. Another way to keep kids safe is to let them use the bathroom of their choice. The responsibility is on the other people in the bathroom to not misbehave and not keep perpetuating a situation that might make other people uncomfortable. So if you have, let's say, a 7th grader who identifies as male that wants to use the male bathroom and the other boys in that school have an issue with it, that's really their issue. And my hope is that the administrators in our county feel supported to have the tools to be able to navigate those issues. If male students were making another student feel uncomfortable in the bathroom, it shouldn't matter what their genitals are. It shouldn't matter if they're cisgender or if they're transgender. They should not be made to feel unsafe. And then again, I've mentioned this, but make sure that we're asking which pronouns, and we need to normalize that. What parents might be feeling. I think I alluded to this before. I mourned the loss of my daughter, and I felt guilty about that. I felt guilty that this wasn't easy for me. I have gay friends. I've had LGBTQ plus students. Like, I shouldn't be having as much of a hard time with my child telling me that they want to be a different gender, but I did. And I think it's okay to feel those things, but it's like, what am I going to do with those feelings, right? And I have decided to use those feelings to fight for other kids, to channel the sadness and the pain that I felt, to make sure that kids and parents get the help they need to navigate this, because this is hard. I do feel like I lost a daughter, and I love my son, and I love who he is, but it's been hard. So parents are going to be struggling with this. I was lucky enough to have had access to information. I was a little further along on my journey than others, but some people might be not quite as far in their journey, and we need to make sure that we honor their feelings and help them navigate them as best as they can. And finally, I want to end with this. It is your responsibility to grow. It is not a transgender person's responsibility to teach you. It is certainly not an LGBTQ plus child's responsibility to teach you. It is your responsibility to grow as a professional and to continue to learn about this topic. So there are lots of low stakes and high stakes resources that I'm going to share out with you, that some of them are TV shows and fun things that you can do to watch to just be exposed to transgender or gender nonconforming individuals. If you want some really heavy books to read, I've got that for you too, but it really is your responsibility to learn more about this so that you can better serve all of the clients and all of the patients that come across your path. I do have a feedback survey. What I'm going to do right now is I am going to throw that in the chat. How do I get back to the chat? I'm going to throw this link in the chat. So this is a feedback survey, and I think I got it right. If you want to receive more information from me, make sure that I have your email address. I will email you later today with a whole list of resources, probably more resources than you want. You will also have my contact information. So I did not include a time for question and answer because an hour didn't seem like enough for me to say everything I need to say, and I tend to be long-winded, but I do want to make sure that you know I am available if you have specific questions. Again, certainly not an expert, but someone who cares and someone who's got a lot of resources that I can share with you. So I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for even being interested in this topic. We have a lot of learning and growing to do, but at the end of the day, it's all about helping kids. So thank you.
Oh my gosh, Danielle. Thank you so much.
I throw a lot of stuff at you.
Wow. Yeah, just so informative. Love your personal story. You know, whenever we can bring something a little bit personal to the table, that really grabs the audience. And I know that I speak for all of us here who appreciate your journey and your heartfelt compassion and you know, genuine interest and passion for this subject area, and definitely coming away with some excellent tips. And I love the challenge that it's on us to grow personally and professionally. And yeah, so we're just very thankful and grateful for your talk today, and really appreciate your time and everything that you put into this, all the effort. It's very obvious. So you are an excellent speaker, and you can tell from that drama background that, you know, voice projection and roll with the punches with the technology. So kudos to you. Thank you so much for being part of this. And I wish we had a live audience and we could all applaud for all of our presenters today who've done such a great job. So thank you, Danielle. We really do appreciate you and your time and effort. So at this point in